Hey,
Oh,
what's up?
hello. Hey, how's it going, Ryan?
Pretty good. How are you, Wes?
Good, good. I'm glad to be joined by my friend Ryan O'Connor. Welcome everyone and to Bookwarm Games. This episode 30, uh, conversation with Ryan O'Connor. And I wanted to first ask if we could set the record straight about your friend and mine, Stephen Abel, and his behavior during Double Dash when you guys used to play that back in college. So what's your memory of that experience, Ryan?
I remember Steve being nothing but a fair and honorable competitor.
There we go. That's his memory of it too, if I recall. I don't know his exact words in the text he sent me, but they were along those lines, I think. Yeah. All right. Well, now that that's set straight, um, how's things going with you? Have you been busy lately, traveling to Ireland or up at your cabin in the woods or anything like that, or just kind of?
Yeah, Crystal and I just got back from Ireland a couple months ago.
Yeah.
We did a walking tour of the western coast. It was really awesome.
Is that one that you've done before, or is that a new destination within Ireland for you?
No, it was a new destination. It was the Dingle Peninsula, which is most recently notable for its Star Wars fame. I guess it was
Oh,
the set for some of the new movies. Yeah.
okay. Is that where the Giant's Causeway is too, or is that a different part?
No, Giant's Causeway is up in Northern Ireland, kind of on the northern coast.
Okay.
Yeah.
This one is has got the ancient caves and stuff where they filmed some of the new Star Wars. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. And some of the old like dry laid stone little they're called beehive huts that folks would have
Yeah.
lived in and that sort of thing. So
Could
but
you actually
yeah,
go through any of that? Did you actually make it
we
up on
yeah,
the
we went to one. It was like I think a church from like the 700s or 800s, and it's
Okay.
still standing, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, those kind of places. Um, I don't know, when we were in Dublin on our trip many years ago, we didn't do a whole lot of that sort of historical stuff, maybe as much as we should have. But those kinds of things are fascinating, and it's really cool that you've got to go back and reconnect with your kind of family history and stuff over there. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, far out.
I can't believe that you would not refer to pubs as being historical sites. Wes.
Uh, I guess they're also kind of quasi-religious, aren't they?
In a
Yeah,
sense, yeah. So,
yeah. Well, okay. Well,
especially in a town like Dublin.
yeah, yeah. I guess everything kind of has that subtext to it. But so I wanted to start with our sort of history as friends. I think if I remember right, I met you playing Foursquare before school at Forest Oak Middle School, and then uh, you were friends with Patrick already, I think somehow, um, and then we became friends like playing Foursquare and playing video games, and I think we had a few classes together probably at some point. Um,
Yeah,
I think you
sounds
were
vaguely
one of
familiar.
yeah, you're one of the only people that I knew at that school, at least, who actually had played EarthBound, which was my favorite game growing up as a kid. And I don't know, I kind of forget now how I even found out about EarthBound. Do you remember how did you find out about it? Do you know?
I know I've that's something that I've long puzzled, but I have very distinct memories of living in Florida before I moved to Gaithersburg, and I was playing EarthBound. It must have been the mid '90s.
Whoa.
Um, and I wish I remembered, but somehow I got my hands on a cartridge and also the the player's guide or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So you got
which
it very
is
early on then, because that was before you
yeah,
even
it
moved
was
up there. Oh, wow.
yeah. And I remember immediately, I think, liking you because you had also played Earthbound, and I think I think you may still be the only person I've ever met that has played it totally independent of me.
Like without you telling someone else about it to get them to play it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird to try to like I don't know, like I said, how I got specifically into Earthbound. Like I remember there were neighbors of mine who were a few years older who played video games like Tetris and Final Fantasy 2 at that time, I think was the new one, and like Mario and stuff. And so generally I got interested in playing Super Nintendo because of them, but I don't think that they played Earthbound either. And I don't know why exactly, like whether they actively didn't want to or if they just weren't that interested in it, hadn't heard about it. Like I don't know. It's such a unique um
Yeah.
so you've got some people to start playing it then. Have you heard from them what they thought after they started?
No, I feel like most people fizzle out around. I want to say like three or maybe just a little bit after that. Maybe when they get to winners.
Uh-huh.
Um, I mean, I definitely think the earlier part of the game is the most interesting and fun and clever. But yeah, I can't think of anybody that I know that has actually made it all the way through to the end that I've introduced to it.
Man,
Um, what about you? Do you have
I
you
know
introduced anybody that and it's really stuck with them?
I know that it hasn't for Pat. Like we talked about this recently, actually. I had him on the show, and he never got that into it. And he talked a little bit about why, like maybe it's just not the kind of game that he generally gets interested in. And then my friend Steve, um, that I think I must have known him before middle school, although it's all a little hazy right now. Um, we used to play it all the time, and I know
Oh,
that he really enjoyed it and all that. Um, but the the early part of the game being an interesting part. All right, it- what do you think that there's anything that you could do here? I don't know if this would make sense like for you as a kid, but maybe now, like thinking about it, is there anything you could have done when introducing people to the game to have gotten them to keep playing it and like get through some of the monotonous, the weird, like the monkey cave and all the parts that are sort of tedious around that part. Yeah, so like what could you say to someone to get them to keep playing to like get through to the end of the game?
well, I think you just hit on it with what you were saying about Steve. Um, I definitely think that it's a game best enjoyed in company. Um, despite it being only one person can play it at a time. Um, it really lends itself to laughter and joking and observation and
Yeah,
um, yeah, I think if you already kind of have played it before and you know what to expect and you enjoy it, it's certainly one thing to play it on your own. But if it's something that's totally new and it's such an odd duck, right?
yeah,
That I think having somebody else there with you to play it with, I think might help it
that's
stick.
that's cool. That's interesting. Yeah, because if in some sense that's the way that the game sort of opens too. It's like you have this guiding figure in Buzz who
Yeah,
appears very very early on to like sort of set you going on your quest. Um, and and so in some respect, what you're describing sounds to me like you would be the little fly or bee or whatever he is buzzing around
yeah,
and kind of getting people to keep going with it. And
yeah. But hopefully not get smacked by Pokey's mom.
well, that's the danger, isn't it? Like, what would that be then? Like, your eagerness and your enthusiasm getting smacked down by the flabby hand of reality or something like that. I don't know. Like it's
Uh,
there's definitely a risk to like be too to show too much love about something, right? It's like makes you
yeah,
vulnerable. So
yeah, yeah.
that's kind of my theory about why Buzz Buzz is defeated so
Mm.
ignominiously, like dishonorably there.
He's too real. Is that?
Yeah,
Is,
he's given too much of himself, right? He's
mm,
put himself out there too much.
well,
Uh,
it probably takes quite a bit of yourself to travel through time, I would think.
that so that's interesting. That's the part of the game that I'm at now. So at the end of the game, right, you come full circle and you go back to Onett and you have to get the piece of the meteorite so they can
Mhm.
adapt the phase distorter so that it can travel through time, right?
Yeah.
And you remember what happens before you can travel back into the past?
I don't actually.
They tell you, and Dr. Andonuts gets very upset about this. He sort of walks off, and you have to go talk to him again. And he says, "You can't go back in your physical body. You have to be into a robot body."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, and so it's sort of like, well, I don't know exactly what to make of that. I'm trying to think about it. I was playing just today as my homework for this week. Ready to try to do another episode. I'm coming up to the very end here, and I it strikes me that there's something about going into the past that you have to let go of like a part of yourself, right? It
Yeah,
it seems to it seems to in Buzz Buzz's case make him vulnerable, uh, and he goes alone, which I also found interesting.
yeah.
And finds and sort of like again becomes that guiding figure for you. What do you think about that?
Well, he did travel alone, and he ended up getting squished. And to link it back to the end of the game, maybe that's why Ness and his friends succeed because they can rely on each other and they do have each other to lean on and support.
Yeah, I like that theme of the game a lot. Actually, the idea that the friendship between these complete strangers like is an integral part of saving the world somehow.
Yeah,
It's always sort of been a little mysterious to me, like how people become friends. Um, Especially, like when you're a kid and trying to think back later, it's just like so long and you like literally can't remember. But even
yeah.
like making friends later, like in college or something with people, like it's it's sort of a mysterious process, right? It's like, how does that how does that take place? To me, it's something like this process of the future reaching out to interact with the present somehow. Um,
Mm.
it's like you can tell there's something about this person that you're going to get along with them, and that sort of future state um, somehow has this impact on you in the moment. Do you think that's like possible, or is that too weird?
No, I think that's true. I was just thinking you had at the beginning of our chat, you had kind of started to talk about your memories of when you and I first met. And the more I think about it, it just does. It all seems very hazy and it's almost unreal, maybe almost out of body, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, well,
Um,
it changed so much over the time too. It's like in some sense it's really not this you really have changed your body, right? You like
yeah,
you had a different physical form in the past and the physical
yeah,
form you are now. Back to that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's so
Where
weird.
once you were some sort of robot, now you're more of a fully fleshed
uh,
being, thing like that, I suppose.
yeah. Well, so I love the idea that Buzz with his coming from the future to the past in some sense represents that sort of thing too, right? Like the
Yeah.
friendship. So we've got the friendship. I think we've got the courage, like the stick-to-itiveness or whatever we've talked a little bit about. So what about wisdom then? Um, in what sense, if any, do you feel like this game teaches us something about wisdom?
Hmm. Oh man, that's a. I don't know. I think that's a good question.
Have you, I don't know, did you feel like as a kid you were learning things from it as you played, or did you play it just to like enjoy it and just because that was fun to do?
I think. I mean, certainly when you're a kid, right? Like you kind of. I certainly appreciate Earthbound more as an adult because you understand more of the references and the jokes and how some of the jokes have multiple layers. Um, but I think as a kid, I just played it because I enjoyed it. Um,
Yeah, I
and
think
I
that,
think for wisdom, I want to say something. With Earthbound, you do travel the whole Earth, right?
yeah,
And I think that's definitely one of the cornerstones of wisdom is like perspective. Um,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
can gain a lot of perspective by traveling to far off lands and meeting people that eat stinky sauerkraut and going into the pyramid and the big city, and so I don't maybe there's something there.
that's the way that the player's guide is sort of set up, which I thought was really cool even as a kid, that it's
Yeah,
set up like a travel guide, right? And
yeah,
and you sort of you get like a little newspaper clipping from each town that appears in the game. That's the way that it's sort of put together. Yeah,
yeah.
I totally agree that as part of the playing and just sort of doing stuff, we maybe don't normally think of that as wisdom, but that's a really good example is like travel. Like you
Hmm.
by going somewhere, by doing something, that's the learning process happening. That's actually
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah,
and
definitely.
it
So
so
while we're on the subject of travel,
uh-huh.
I don't know that I've ever bothered to look it up or found out or whatever, but why do you think they selected um, Earthbound to be the English, Western name for the game?
The translator, I know a little bit about the translation because I got this book, Legends of
Yeah,
Localization, but I don't remember. I'd have to look it up if it's in there. Um, the actual title, like you know that this is it's a sequel, right?
yeah,
It's actually two, so it's the sequel to another game, and it's got that series title, Mother. But since there was no Mother in in America, yeah, and I
America's
don't think that that
motherless.
title would necessarily, I don't think that title would necessarily make much sense to translate
Yeah,
literally or whatever. But Earthbound, I've always found it to be a really evocative, name. Um, there's a few different ways you could take it, really, right?
yeah,
Like in one sense, you're stuck on the earth or something. That's kind of how it's usually um, used. But in this game, it seems to be more along the sense that you are like, yeah, bound to the earth. You're
mm,
sort of uh, in connection with it
oh,
in a deep way.
yeah,
Uh, and and it's interesting that that the real title is Mother, um, because that I mean is a pretty good description of the
mm,
earth, but it also obviously has like a more immediate meaning.
yeah,
Uh, and the way that the game progresses, Ness always has to call home periodically. He gets homesick, and his mom is the only thing that will get him sort of back focused on his journey,
yeah.
is talking to her. Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's just one of the sort of the things that comes to mind about that.
Yeah.
But the traveling, yeah, the traveling element is definitely uh an interesting one. The way that your journey um fills in the soundstone,
Yeah.
right? That's sort of like that's like the quest that you're on at first.
Yeah.
Um, but ultimately the soundstone disappears, right? So you get to a certain point, you have all the melodies, and then you have to go to Magicant, like in your mind. And when you wake up from that, uh, the soundstone disappears. It's gone. Um, and somehow your I take that to mean that that Ness has like integrated that experience.
And
It's no longer, yeah, it's no longer outside. It's like inside of him now.
yeah.
Yeah. And then of course, so then you're in like the home stretch of the game. You do the meteorite thing, and you do the time travel thing, and then well then you're at the end, right? So what did you like, do you remember when you first got to the end of the game? Did it like freak you out? Um did you know what to do?
I I think I did because I feel like the player's guide tells you what to do, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
gives you sort of unusually precise instructions, isn't that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Um
I feel like as a kid, I think I was probably let down a little bit by how what is it? You just have Paula pray 5 or 10 or something times, isn't that right? Not to
Mhm.
spoil the ending or anything like that.
it's it's cool. Like I tried to tell people up front that this was not going to be a spoiler free podcast series, so hopefully they aren't too but you know, this, like you said, the player's guide also tells you what to do. So but yeah, what do you make of that? Like the way that you win against the final boss is not by fighting but by praying
Yeah.
ultimately.
Well, it's just so it's like almost like countercultural or subversive or something, right? Like that's just not how video games end with the final boss. Like the final boss, you like beat them down and stand on top of them and raise your sword or your gun or your baseball bat in triumph.
You know, right, your robotic hand raising your baseball bat in triumph. Yeah. But this it strikes me that yeah, there is something uh kind of cool about how well first of all, like if you try to win by fighting, you can't. Like you will lose. So anyone who didn't have the player's guide and didn't know what to
Oh,
do, I think would be probably really
yeah,
stuck. Like until they, like by desperation, maybe they would try pray, and then they'd realize like they actually did that. Like they were actually sort of
yeah,
praying when they used the pray option, which I think is pretty wild. Um, and like really interesting. Like you remember when we played Metal Gear, right? There were moments in that
yeah,
game, Metal Gear Solid and its sequel, where it like does that kind of meta thing
yeah.
and it sort of involves the player. But I think Earthbound did that in a really interesting way. Um, you know, with various things throughout the game. A lot of them are kind of jokes, but this one it seems like is pretty. It sort of hits home, I think.
Yeah, I think it really suits the character of the game and the designers and kind of what they were going for, right?
I think so. Yeah. And so it's intriguing to me, yeah, that you sort of gain power from the earth and all your travels and things, but ultimately what brings peace and saves the world, right, is the connections that you've made
Yeah.
with other people throughout your journey, right? So like
Yeah.
all these people that you met. Yeah, yeah.
Also,
And
I've only beaten it once or twice, you know, post I guess like post high school or post undergrad, something like that. And I found when I got to that point, it was almost a relief. Like it was a relief to be able to stop um bashing,
yeah.
you know, the attack button and pulling out, freeze Omega or whatever. It was a relief to be able to put all that down and just, I don't know, embrace all the connections and stuff that you've made throughout the journey.
Yeah, I think as a kid, you might not notice that as much, but yeah, I think there is a great value in going back and playing these games. Well, at least Earthbound.
Yeah,
I'm gonna try to explore a few other ones too, but I wanted to start with Earthbound because I thought it's the one that had the biggest impact on me as a kid, and
yeah,
that like you, I've gone back to and played it since then, and I find it really, yeah, rewarding, interesting, and like I just think it's great. Like I think I wanted, so I wanted to share it with people. That's why I'm kind of curious about like what do you think the best way to do that is? Like
yeah,
to bring more people into contact with this fantastic, experience of playing this game.
yeah.
Um,
I've I've yet to
could
I've yet to look anything like this up, but I wonder if you could, yeah, maybe in concert with this podcast that you've started to do, um, if you could somehow stream, like on Twitch or something, down and
uh,
kind of have a running commentary and a running dialogue with viewers or with participants in playing
yeah,
with you.
that would be cool because that's got the kind of live interaction element, which is what the podcast hasn't got, except for when I get calls from my friends, right? So it's like it's something that yeah, I would love to do. I'd love to do more with that live interaction kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, that is a good idea.
What
I
what games are you thinking about exploring
the,
down the road?
the next series I want to do is going to be on a book instead. It's going to be Philip
Yeah,
Pullman's
Golden Compass.
Golden Compass. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to start with that next. Take a step back from games, but look at that kind of in the same way that I've been doing with Earthbound and see
Yeah,
what kinds of things I can dig into with that. But then I do want to come back to um, Xenogears for the PlayStation. That was one that I thought, as a kid playing it, I felt like there was a lot more going on in that game than I really like could grasp.
yeah.
Um, so I want to revisit it, and I never actually beat that game. I always got towards the end and lost steam.
That's
Um,
that's the game with the mechs, right? And the mech battles.
yeah, it's super over the top. I mean, it's like it's got very little of the humor that makes Earthbound so
Yeah,
awesome. But it has got some very deep, it at least makes some pretensions towards some very deep themes. So I want to see how those kind of hold up on a second look here.
yeah,
That's the next game I want to do. I'm with my friend Alex and Vince, friend of ours. We're talking about Final Fantasy VII as a group right now. Like every week we do like an hour's worth of gameplay or so.
nice.
Um, yeah, so that's going on concurrently, and sort of I just I find that game interesting and cool, but it's not like one of my personal favorite necessarily. So it's it's one that I'm happy to do.
Yeah,
For you, I remember you always used to like tactics a lot.
yeah.
What is it about tactics that was so enthralling to you?
I think it was the like just how much thought you could put into a single like battle, I guess. And just the mental gymnastics of juggling all the different variations and what could happen and figure out
Yeah.
how to optimize your way through a battle, stuff like that. But um, I remember even as a kid really appreciating the difficulty of it too. It was one of those games that um, wasn't impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly um, there were definitely battles that I had to restart, one or two or three times just because um, they were just hard. They were hard to overcome. Um, for a variety of different reasons. But um, it,
And
it's like chess, kind
that,
of the same thing that attracted me to chess growing up too. Um,
that's what I was just going to bring up. Yeah, it sounds like the strategy element, right? Or sort of thinking down the line, like what will happen if you do
yeah,
this thing, that thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
And
I did love
um
too the setting of I think there's definitely something in like romantic about like knights and wizards and that sort of thing. I think that setting, for whatever reason, has always resonated with me, and
yeah.
just being able to engage in that type of world.
Well, so you took your interest in history and stuff, and you actually studied archaeology, right? And worked, out in the field a bit. And uh, is that something that you still like read up on and study now?
Yeah, yeah. I'm lucky to be married to an archaeologist too, so I get to
That's
I
right.
get to engage with that half of my I don't know, half of my brain or whatever. I'll volunteer and go dig with her every once in a while, and um read
Nice.
articles along those lines and that type of stuff. Yeah.
And how do you think that is that something that you sort of consider akin to the fantasy setting, right? Like, is the past a kind of fantasy realm in a way, or
Oh, um,
how would you?
that's
Yeah,
a. I think that's a really good question. Yeah, I definitely think to some extent the past is almost. I think fantasy is probably like a good word, right? Like, there's definitely the. It's definitely human nature to kind of airbrush out the crappy parts of the past and only remember the good times or whatever. Um,
yeah.
and I guess I don't mean fantasy necessarily in a bad way because there's definitely stuff worth forgetting. But um, yeah, I think there definitely is some sort of parallel. I think you've hit on something interesting.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about like where games sort of fit into the traditional like genres of literature,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, right? You've kind of got like poetry and plays, and then you've got your various kinds of fiction and the novel and all that. Um, and and if you were to like kind of try to make a genre for it, like does Final Fantasy Tactics, does it really fit into the same genre as like EarthBound, uh, Final Fantasy VII, and all those?
Mm.
Is it sort of its own kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't. That's kind of the hard part, right? Is where does the game design per se sit and how you categorize it with, say, like elements of the story or
Yeah,
that
yeah,
sort of thing? Because I think tactics has a similar focus on themes such as like courage and wisdom and uh, fidelity. Um, but you're right. I mean, the gameplay is so radically kind of different to some extent that do they belong in the same category as works of art or works of game or what have you?
well, yeah, because like if you look at really old historical documents, right? They're basically like what we would consider fantasy or like imaginary stuff, right? You get like sort of mythical elements and legendary elements all mixed together willy-nilly. Um, and I wonder if we're sort of like at that point in our game development, because games are video games, that is, they're such a new thing
Yeah,
that we haven't really like hashed out the boundaries maybe between different forms quite yet, and we're still sort of like working on like what are the possibilities here, what kinds of stories can be told in what different ways.
yeah,
um yeah, so I find it a really interesting, well, I don't know, I never liked playing Final Fantasy Tactics as much, but I definitely was like fascinated by the story that it has. It's got a kind of there's a betrayal thing going on, right?
Yeah,
It's one of the so in that way it's very medieval, because that was sort of a fascination.
yeah,
Right?
very,
Uh,
yeah, medieval. Yeah, definitely is the right word for that. And um,
is that one that you would want to do a podcast about, or like talk more about at some point?
you know, I don't know. Maybe that's an interesting idea. I've always felt that the um the world of tactics Ivalice was kind of one of the high, like missed chances for I guess it was probably Squaresoft to really
Yeah.
explore more fully. I was always really disappointed that they didn't make more games set in that world with those kind of more um deep deeply thought out themes, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And to allow you to explore more. Yeah, totally.
yeah. I'd have to chew on that. That's an interesting idea, though.
Because part of what I do with this, is try to get all my friends to make uh, courses as well, because there's too many things out there, for one person to try to talk about them all.
Yeah.
But I definitely am interested in. So like with Ben, I tried to get him to do a Zelda one, and with Steve, his his interest is with these escape the room type games, the 999 series. So anyway, yeah. So think about it. Do think
All
about it.
right. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
definitely enjoyed your all's you and Steph's what's the farming game?
Oh yeah. Stardew
Stardew
Valley.
Valley. Yeah, I definitely a lot of what she was saying about it, I definitely could relate to because I think I had a minor Stardew Valley addiction there for about 2.5 weeks. Um, it got pretty
Yeah.
serious, and I had to detox and go cold turkey. So, um,
That is the danger.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
But
meant to ask you, what are you other than Earthbound and I guess Final Fantasy? What are you playing anything else right now?
I I think uh my friend Ben sent me a game on the computer, where the water tastes like wine. It's a computer game though, so it's like I have to sit at the computer,
Mm,
and that always feels sort of like work to me. So I haven't got into that one too far yet. But I do plan on playing that soon.
yeah,
Um, and these days I sort of like only play games if I can justify it to myself by saying that I'm, like learning
yeah,
something while doing it.
yeah.
I really think that it's not entirely bullshit that I actually do come up with cool ideas while I'm sitting there like really thinking about it and not just kind of playing. Um, it's definitely a way to like get around me feeling like I'm totally wasting my time also. But,
Yeah.
'cause like I said, there's just too much stuff. There's too many books. There's too many things to do, like totally outside of, art and stuff. There's like, well, you could go outside, or like go out and hang out with people, and
Go for
that's
a ride along the Spokane River, or
totally.
I
Hmm.
definitely have
But
played games as an adult for an hour or two or three and gotten to the end of it and been like, man, I really kind of wish I had that time back. So that's good that you're being deliberate, with your game playing.
I'm trying. I think, well, anyway, I certainly am glad that in some small way at least it's allowed me to reconnect with some friends who I don't talk to enough. So I really appreciate your time, and please do keep sending thoughts and questions and stuff in, when you get the chance.
Yes.
It's really good to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely, Wes. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, um, till next time we talk, take care and say hi to Crystal and everybody. Um, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Yeah, sounds good, Wes.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.